Good evening. This meeting is open to the public and is available through an online platform. Please subscribe to the Township of Wilmot YouTube channel to watch the live stream or view after the meeting. I currently need a motion to reconvene in open meeting. Moved by Councillor Gordick, second by Councillor Gerber. All in favor? That is carried. Good evening and thank you for joining us for the September 13th, 2021 council meeting. At this time, I would like to ask that we all take a moment of silence in honor of the lives lost 20 years ago at the World Trade Center. Acts of terrorism have far-reaching effects on many lives. May the victims continue to rest in peace, while their families, friends, and co-workers continue to heal from the tragedy. Thank you. I'll call on Councillor Fenning to read the land acknowledgement, please.
We've gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. This month, we've raised a flag to acknowledge that every child matters. And we ask that everyone keep the children who didn't make it home, who didn't come home from the residential schools in their thoughts, and the families and the legacy that that leaves. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community.
Thank you. Are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none. The recommendation that the agenda as presented for September 13th, 2021 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Fenning and Councillor Fisher. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. Next recommendation is that the minutes of the following meetings be adopted as presented. Regular council meeting, August 23rd, 2021. That is moved by Councillor Fenning, Councillor Gordick. Any comments, questions, omissions, corrections? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. There's no public meetings, presentations. The consent agenda has one item. And that recommendation, that report number PFRS 2021-014 be approved. And that has to do with the Wilmot Seniors Woodworking and Craft Center license agreement. Councillor Gordick, you have a question or comment?
I do, thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong, I just have a quick one just based on some of the conversations we've had with other insurance policies within the township. Just wondering why it's only 3 million and not 5 million when most of our others are going to that 5 million. So it's just more of a clarification question for that one. Thank you.
Ms. Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. Through to Councillor Gordick. The previous agreement required $2 million for this activity, and their insurance company preferred to move up in $1 million at a time, so to speak. So we did clear it with our insurance pool, and they were good with $3 million instead of 5 at this time. We will look at increasing it at the next opportunity when we renew the agreement.
Councillor Hallman.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Ms. Jackson. Are there other organizations community groups within Wilmot that have similar contracts? Thinking of organizations or not-for-profit groups that have invested into, like our municipality, like TCP, for example. Do we have similar contracts with any other groups like this?
Through the mayor, we do have an agreement with the Wilmot Horticulture Society, which you saw earlier this year. So that's an example of this agreement, This is a unique one because they are running independently, and it is a recreational activity, but it's essentially a community development opportunity where someone else is providing a service for the town on behalf of the township. Other woodworking shops are generally inside township run facilities. So this one's a little bit unique. And so it was important that we got the right agreement in place, and we worked closely with the folks who are running the Woodworking Craft Center to get this agreement completed. There aren't too many other examples. Normally what we do is we do a rental agreement versus this type of agreement where we're actually licensing the space for them. So it's a little bit unique, and we worked closely with our legal counsel on this one as well.
Great, thank you.
Seeing no other questions. That was moved by Councillor Fenning, Councillor Gordick. All in favor? Carried. Next item is the midterm work program. Ms. Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. Really pleased to bring this report forward today in the form that it's in. The midterm work program update before you this evening, it has a new look after the corporate leadership team reflected on what was included in the work plan historically and earlier in the year when you received the initial version. So we've done a significant review, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank Ms. Murray, who's on this call. She was leading this process of getting this project updated. So thank you to you, Tracy. So some of the changes we after doing that review, the corporate leadership team had really wanted to bring some improvements to the document forward to council in order to really clarify what the team is working on. And they're all just turning their cameras on. So I'm going to pause while they jump on to be here for you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So some of the changes that we've made to this report are with respect to things that are already being reported to council in a different way. So first of all, the capital projects, we just did a thorough review of the capital project status at the most recent council meeting. And these were all duplicated in this document as well. So we have removed the capital projects unless they had a research component or a public consultation component or something more significant like an environmental assessment that's going to take some time. So that's the first change that you'll see in this midterm update. The second one is that a number of the projects cross over several departments, and we historically identified a particular department as the lead department, and each area that was involved in that project had it added to their section as well. In order to make it easier to read and streamline it, the only location that each of the projects is showing up is in the lead department's list. And all of the other folks are still working as a team to deliver that project, but it just shows up in one location. And then finally, tasks that are of an operating nature that are a regular part of staff's responsibility have been removed. Things that are done annually, attendance at various meetings, things like that. All of those pieces will be updated through quarterly update reports, which is an operational reporting mechanism to council. So this new approach reflects the projects and initiatives that are quite unique to 2021 in each department. And some of these projects and initiatives will be multi-year, so they will show up again perhaps next year. However, this approach clearly represents a work plan that reflects the priorities that are over and above the normal workload and the normal capital projects that are on the docket for the year. So that's sort of a general summary of why this looks quite a bit different than the original work plan you got earlier in the year. And we are all here happy to answer any questions you have about this new layout, as well as any specific items that are on the work plan. Thank you.
Councillor Gordick.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. So thank you, Ms. Jackson. It was one of my sort of things when we first got the work plan a couple of years, or I guess maybe a year and a half ago, that I thought it could be streamlined. So thank you to Ms. Murray and the rest of the CL team, because yes, it's a lot easier to read. Even just sometimes when it changed from different departments, the language changed. So you're trying to figure out if it was the same project or not the same project. So kudos and thank you very much for the effort. It was a lot easier to read and understand. So thank you. With that being said, I just have a couple of questions, because obviously with COVID, I know that some of the things are going to have some different answers and where we're at. So I wanted to ask with regards to information and legislative services, but I might not be able to get those answers. So maybe perhaps Ms. Murray or yeah. So as I realize that Ms. Minderholtz is not available this evening. So the Thank You Neighbor program notices it says that it's complete, but I haven't seen anything go out to let us know that we're going to be letting our neighbors know that they can do some sort of thank you to their neighbors for being kind. I'm not quite sure what it means by the complete. So that's one. I'm just going to kind of give you them and then you can go through them. The other one, the flag and proclamation government's policy, just wondering, it doesn't have a time frame. Like, are we expecting it to be looked at Q3, Q4, 2022? And taking that into account, also, I believe the code of conduct, I don't see a time frame for that as well. And that is something that we did request to get done before next council. And also, finally, for me and Councillor Hallman, she may already have this on her list, the Crime Prevention Committee. We've been waiting for that since we started, and there's no date or time or anything with that at all. And, you know, it would be kind of nice to get that committee started. There was a want and a need for it, and now we're like end of year 3 and nothing seems to change with that. So those are my comments for now.
Go ahead, Ms. Murray.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. I can answer all of these questions mostly. In terms of the Thank You Neighbor, that was done back in the spring, and there was some social media done on it. There wasn't much uptake on it at that point in time, but we can certainly do another round of letting people know, and that's easy to do. The flag proclamation, I don't have an update on that, but I can get that information for you. Code of conduct, I know that we were speaking about getting that going sooner rather than later. So I can most certainly get a little bit more of a date on when that'll get started so that council is aware of that. And with the crime prevention, from what I understand, previously getting meetings together and getting people together was a challenge. But now myself and Ms. Merritt in bylaw will be taking on that a little bit more and putting, you know, trying to get a little bit more oomph and getting that going.
Thank you. Councillor Hallman.
Thank you through the mayor. Councillor Gordick shared a lot, I guess we had good things on our list. The Thank Your Neighbor was a motion that I brought to council, so I was really looking forward to that, and I didn't see any, I tried to find it on the website this weekend, and couldn't find anything. And I have had different service groups reach out to me looking for acknowledgement to participate. So if council can be circulated on that, so we can direct that to the appropriate channels, so that way the mayor and the appropriate ward councillors can start participating and getting that rolling, because I know there is interest in the community. Then the safety committee. I'd asked for that to be this fall and was really looking forward to, and I know that I've copied in a few of you on residents who are actively looking to engage as they've put their names forward on this. So I'm really hoping that we can see that come to fruition before the year end. I think that's it for me. So thanks. And I do want to, I will just add that I am very thankful for the new organization method of this. It was so much easier to go through than the last few years. So I know that was a whole reorganizing of that, and it was greatly appreciated. And I know the effort that goes in behind the scenes is usually not rewarded. So please know that my reading eyes greatly appreciated that effort.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, to the Director of Corporate Services. Line 65, I was just wondering if you have any updates on the grant application for Community Building Fund.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, thanks for the question, Councillor Fisher. We did just complete our grant application to the Infrastructure Green Stream Intake 2. So now we've shifted focus onto the next three items, 63, 64, and 65, all recently announced programs with pretty compressed schedules for when the applications are due, as has been the process lately. So we have talks going internally through CLT, and specifically with a focus through the Parks, Facilities and Recreation Services area to look at some eligible projects that would make sense for this application. The application was launched just earlier in this month, so we'll be meeting, discussing potential projects and putting an application forward at that time.
Okay, Councillor Gordick.
Thank you, through Mayor. With Councillor Fisher's comment, it just made me want to ask a question to the Director of Corporate Services. When we're not successful, such as with the backflow, am I saying that right? Is there a reason given, or is it just that we're told that we're not successful?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, to Councillor Gordick. Generally speaking, no. We don't get a rationale behind it, because we do write, as this council is aware, some fairly strong applications, and historically have been quite successful on most of them. We have a strong focus on looking at the exact criteria that the province or federal governments are looking for, and kind of building our applications towards that. But unfortunately, when we are unsuccessful, we don't get a really clear explanation as to why. What we do, however, is look for alternative programs that might meet that need. So you will note that though we were unsuccessful through the National Disaster Mitigation Program for the backwater valve program funding, we did submit an application, which was a fairly quick turnaround. Thanks for the support from Mr. O'Krafka on that. We got a submission in under the Community Environmental Fund to try and fund, albeit a smaller version of what we had originally planned, but at least to get the program off the ground. We haven't heard back at this point in time whether we're successful with that funding, though.
Follow up then? Further to that, then, because we did have a program in place, what are the implications then with that?
So we have to say we have a program in place might be a bit premature. We have plans to implement a program subject to external funding support. So we need to look at how much funding support we can garner externally, structure a program that's reasonable and hits the highest target areas, I guess is the best way to maybe say it, as a priority. And then as funding becomes available through other means, we would expand the program to fit more areas of the community in.
Thank you. And then finally, I have one question actually for Ms. Jackson in her role as Director of Parks. It's just a quick little thing, as more of a question of like for fun. I've been noticing a lot of QR codes going around for a lot of events. recently. And in fact, with Cherry Fox, we have QR codes for fundraising now. So it's kind of taken on a new life. And I'm just wondering, I noticed that the maintenance program with the trails and stuff, I'm wondering if there's a possibility of incorporating QR codes for people who maybe perhaps want to, if there's information on the trails. I'm just sort of throwing that out there as a sort of an as a side, as part of the Trails Committee, to maybe put QR codes on our signage if it's within possible, because of, you know, obviously replacing the signs could be a costly endeavor, but just a thought.
Yeah, through Mayor Armstrong to Councillor Gordick, those are all really great ideas. We would love to have educational components in our parks, in our arboretum, in all kinds of locations, our hort beds. It's just a matter of resources and about, you know, really the challenge. I love that you mentioned the Trails Committee. There's somebody else on the screen that might have a tie to that, so we can perhaps talk about that a little bit offline as well. But I appreciate that suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions on the work program? Seeing none. Recommendation that the 2021 midterm work program report CAO 2021-003 dated September 13th, 2021, submitted by the interim chief administrative officer be endorsed. Moved by Councillor Gordick, Councillor Fenning, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next item is the Indigenous Reconciliation Action Plan. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. This report's being provided to update council on the significant work that's being undertaken by staff across the entire region as part of the Reconciliation Action Plan Working Group. I guess in follow-up to the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the 94 calls to action, the region, all lower tier municipalities, earlier this year in August of 2020 began working together on a coordinated effort to support Indigenous centered initiatives across the region. The Reconciliation Action Plan Working Group, or RAPWG, consists of staff from across all municipalities within the region and are working closely together with Indigenous communities to advance reconciliation, including collaborative efforts towards a reconciliation action plan. Over the course of the past year, we've established 5 separate subcommittees of the overarching Reconciliation Plan Working Group. Those subcommittees are focused on learning and development, honorarium practices, placekeeping and land opportunities, communication and events, and most recently, heritage and cultural landscapes. While it's inspiring for us, for sure, to see the level of commitment from elected officials across the region, and most notably from here within Wilmot, it is critical, we see as the RAPWG, that staff start to establish effective two-way communication with Indigenous communities. And the RAPWG does provide a unique opportunity for us to do so, ensuring that outreach is consistent across the region and all lower tier municipalities, so we can move things forward in a more effective manner. Getting into the report a little bit, staff heard from community members specifically more recently about the need for access to space for cultural or ceremonial events, and that cost can sometimes be a barrier to allowing that to happen. So in commemoration of the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, the region and all municipalities are bringing forward motions similar to the one this evening, making recommendations to permanently waive fees for rental of facilities and parks for Indigenous-led events for cultural and ceremonial use annually on September 30th. However, further to that, staff will also be adding an action within our 2022 work program to work with the Indigenous community to find ways to support Indigenous-led events in township spaces in a manner that's appropriate to them through a consultation exercise. So we will as it says, we'll waive the fees on an application basis that's being run through one portal. Information will be released on that shortly. And then moving forward, looking at how we can support use of spaces across the remainder of the year. Also in the report is discussion on the preliminary budget for the Reconciliation Action Plan Working Group. So to date, this group has worked without a budget whatsoever. Staff on as other duties, I guess, as assigned for staff in a lot of municipalities have participated on this. For our municipality specifically, we have representation, which we're quite proud of, that there's representation on all of those subcommittees. For a small municipality, it's difficult from a resource perspective to be there, but there's presence on all those committees with Ms. Jackson, Mr. Okrafka, Ms. Baird, and myself representing the Township of Wilmot on those. We do have a preliminary budget estimate of $200,000 for 2022 to support the work of this group. Based on the preliminary cost sharing, it would be a minimal cost to the Township of Wilmot of around $3,500 if it is approved. The waiving of fees specifically is an unbudgeted expense that we would cover under the municipal grants program for this year. And then moving forward, we would include a provision within the grants program to allow for future applications to waive fees. The motion, just in conclusion, the motion is fairly lengthy, but as noted, I believe at our last meeting, when a notice of motion was brought forward from Councillor Hallman, this motion was provided by AMO for municipalities across the province to use in regards to the importance of doing the work that we're doing as part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. It further notes in the motion that the rental related fees for the use of our parks and facilities would be waived for September the 30th, and direction given to staff for us to work on that corporate guideline to support access of these spaces by Indigenous led communities through a public consultation process. Happy to answer any questions. And again, I'm grateful for the opportunity to update council on the work that this group's been doing, because it's been a lot. So open to any questions.
Councillor Gordick.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Thank you very much, Patrick. I appreciate the report and love the idea. Just a quick one. Because of the time frame, has there been any, because of the consultation that you've had with Indigenous groups within this group itself in the region, has there been any uptake for the September 30th date? And then second of all, I understand that it's region-wide, that there's some initiatives. That's great. Just wondering about individuality within that. Is there room or scope within the working group itself to allow for some individuality to sort of say, you know, the Indigenous community within Wilmot wants to do something? Are we having to follow the region's working group in order to sort of take some initiative on our own to allow for that?
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong, and thanks for the question, Councillor Gordick. So for the first piece of the question, as far as the amount of uptake, there's been minimal thus far. There has been some through the city of Kitchener, I know, but outreach to the Indigenous communities directly has had some requests for use of park space within the cities predominantly at this point, but we're still expecting some more as these reports are rolling out to the public across all the municipal councils. With regards to our ability to be individual, certainly there is that ability there. The needs in each of the lower tier municipalities in the region are unique. They're not all exactly the same. The importance, and this was outlined within the report, is that we try to remain active and open, transparent in our dialogue across all the lower tier municipalities and the region with any initiatives that we're bringing forward or that our communities might be bringing forward. Because as we know, when something does happen in one municipality, the expectation is kind of put there, or at least the question as to what are you doing in your municipality. So what we try to do is have as many conversations flow through the committee so we can keep everyone aware of what is happening within our jurisdictions, and that helps us to all adapt and provide programs and supports where we can. Obviously, the need isn't going to be the same in every jurisdiction, but at least keeping everybody at the table and aware of what's going on helps. And again, fosters that relationship between staff and members of the Indigenous community and linking one another up with opportunities in each municipality. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Holman.
Thank you, through the mayor. I've received a couple of questions regarding this report from local members of the Indigenous community. If comments can be made on if there's intent to include other important days through this working group, such as Lua Real Day, that they could ask to have the fees waived within the community. I don't know who can comment on that for me.
I can take that question, Mayor Armstrong. Thanks, Councillor Holman. So yeah, I think the rationale for getting this report out as quickly as we are right now is to make sure they're waived for September the 30th. As stated within the report, we want to put something in place, a program that meets needs throughout the entire year. So we would like to have that dialogue with the Indigenous community where possible to find certain dates or activities or ceremonial events that they're looking for, so we can link them up with the appropriate resources to make it happen, whether that resource is the use of a space or they need a grant of some sort. That's the type of programs we're looking to establish. With regards to spaces, we did put together a listing that is giant that went out to the Indigenous community that said, here's every available park and facility that's municipally owned across the entire region of Waterloo. Please reach out and let us know if you'd like to use these spaces for ceremonial events, and we can orchestrate that or make that happen. So yeah, consideration of specific days. Louis Real Day would make complete sense to me, but we want to have appropriate consultation before we just announce a program.
Thank you. And one more question, Mayor. The other question is asking if, you kind of addressed it with that answer actually, access to land near water, as there's an interest to hold ceremony in Wilmot with access to water. So again, if they reach out with those requests to get that list, that would be an opportunity.
Yeah,
Okay.
just through you, Mayor Armstrong. So that this is an important distinction of the work the subcommittees do on behalf of that greater community, because that's a very specific unique request that would fit under the land opportunities and placekeeping subcommittee. So what we have is a representative that chairs that committee, and Sandy is the representative from the township, sorry, Ms. Jackson, on that committee. So the request would flow through to myself on the action plan working group representative. I would take it to the chair and say, hey, we have a request in our community about ceremonial events close to water due to the, being close to the creator, close to that resource. And we orchestrate a way to make that happen, get people talking to the right people to move it forward in a successful way.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Fenning.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Just actually clarification, Director, on the flow of requests. So a request from the community would go to you, to the chair, and then down to the subcommittee?
Yeah, it might sound awkward and like there's extra steps. It's very fast. It's just making sure that I guess I'm aware, or the lead for the township is aware of what requests are coming in. I can make sure they get to the right spot, knowing each of the subcommittees that exist and the structure and the mandate of them. That's probably the quickest way to get to it. Then again, knowing as well that the representatives that we have on each of the subcommittees, if that direction would go to our representative from that subcommittee as well, that wouldn't be a problem.
Just to follow up, if I could, then just to clarify, then if and obviously this is all starting, and we've got obviously a lot to hammer out and consultation to happen and so on, but just to put the thought out there that if we're looking at Wilmot residents or a Wilmot sort of activity that's looking to be held for and if that, wherever that particular ask lands, I think it would probably be useful to make I'm assuming that the decision-making can come directly from our staff about our facilities. And I think that might be important for the community to understand that, we're not going to the region to ask about a Wilmot Township park. It's still our staff, Wilmot Township staff, that are making decisions directly for Wilmot residents about Wilmot.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Armstrong, that's a really important distinction that you made. The rationale of bringing it to the committee is so they're aware that this is happening in Wilmot. What are you doing in your community? Putting you on notice that you might have a similar request in your community. The decision-making of what we do and how we support the Indigenous community within Wilmot remains our decision. We don't have to ask approval from the region or other municipalities to do so.
Thank you. I think that is an important sort of piece for people to understand.
Councillor Gordick.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a follow-up then with regards to what Councillor Fanning had brought up. Will there be a place on our website so that people can see where to go? Not necessarily all the different people, because that can change with whatever, but just maybe perhaps some of the logistics with what's involved and all that. Will that be like a page for our residents to use, and maybe even have a form submission on that page?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Gordick. Yes, there definitely will be a resource within our own website providing information. It'll likely be initially a link to the broader Reconciliation Action Plan group and what we're doing. As far as direct requests into us, we can include information on our own webpage to do that, but we are working collectively on kind of a joint communications effort. As mentioned, Ms. Baird sits on the communications subcommittee, working on some resources to get out there to kind of tell the story of what this group is doing. And again, it's not our
You went silent there.
oh,
There you
better
go.
now? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where I went silent, but essentially it's the communications subcommittee will be working towards getting that messaging out in a uniform fashion. We'll still have our own unique communications methods for Wilmot to have people be able to reach us directly, and we'd use the website as the best resource to navigate to get a hold of stuff.
Thank you, Councillor Fanning.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. And this, we're maybe jumping the gun a little bit because, we've acknowledged that we're just starting this process. But I think, I can imagine that giant list that was referred to is going to be, sort of pared down so that we will have a list of Wilmot Township spaces that are available for Wilmot Township residents to not have to sort through and kind of figure out where, what exists in their own community.
Ms. Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify, I mean, all of our parks are already listed on our website with quite a bit of detail. So anyone looking for information specific to the township would be able to already find that. But we can, I believe that list that was created has each municipality separated out, and it's quite clear. So if we do load that up, it'll be easy enough to find for sure.
Okay, thank you. I see no further questions. So the recommendation is there before you. It's rather lengthy and it has been read once before, I believe, by everybody. So we need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Fanning, second by Councillor Hallman. No further questions or comments. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next item is aggregate zoning status review. And see, Mr. Martin has come online. He wishes to address this.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. The report that you have before you is a result of a commitment that was made to review the current status of our zoning as part of the 2021 work plan. Comments received from citizens for safe groundwater through the initial review of the comprehensive zoning bylaw indicated that there were some areas that they requested modifications to or updates in the zoning, but given the late receipt of those comments, they were not included through the public consultation process during the zoning bylaw update, and as a result, were subsequently reviewed through this update that this report describes. The report provides a table that outlines the regulations that were reviewed through all municipalities in Waterloo region, our neighboring municipalities, as well as the top 10 aggregate producing municipalities in Ontario. And the table provides a comparison of zoning bylaw regulations along with the Aggregate Resource Act regulations. The report the table identifies a number of municipalities that either duplicate the policies and regulations of the Aggregate Resources Act or are silent on those regulations. One reason municipalities remain silent is that ultimately each aggregate application is dealt with upon its individual merits and ultimately has to comply with the Aggregate Resource Act regulations. Official plans, specifically in Wilmot, identify the studies and reports and scientific information that needs to be reviewed and provided in support of every individual application, which then ultimately results in the setbacks that must at least be equivalent to the Aggregate Resources Act, but in some instances may be different or more restrictive. The inclusion of these regulations within a zoning bylaw is not essential, and that's why a number of municipalities choose to be silent on those regulations, as the ARA is the ultimate authority on those setbacks, and because each individual application is looked at scientifically on its individual merits, the most appropriate way to include those setbacks is at the culmination of the review of all the studies that are provided in support of each individual aggregate application. Comments were received from citizens for safe groundwater. They were included in the report. Subsequent comments received at the beginning of September duplicated those that were received earlier in the process, but removed the updates that were already undertaken in the bylaw, which were primarily typographic errors that were corrected in the zoning bylaw update. Staff are of the opinion that although there are areas that our current zoning is less restrictive than the ARA, it's not essential at this point to update the zoning bylaw given the nature of an involvement in a comprehensive update to the zoning. It would be more appropriate to include any changes in a future process that deals with more than one housekeeping item within the bylaw. At that point, if we were to complete a housekeeping process, there would be options available to either duplicate the regulations of the ARA, or like other municipalities in Waterloo region and other jurisdictions, to simply remove the regulations and defer to the ARA. And that would be options that could be considered at that time. So essentially, staff would suggest that the status of our zoning is sufficient for the purposes of applications received. Each individual application that within the township that exists today was done site specifically, and any future application within the municipality would also be looked at upon its individual scientific merits and ultimately result in the appropriate setbacks in compliance with those studies and ARA regulations. At this point, I'll leave the comments at that, and certainly I'm available to answer any questions.
Councillor Gordick.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. I just want some clarification, Mr. Martin or Mr. Krafka, depending on how my question goes. So just want to understand, so while Perth has a larger setback, if an application comes to Wilmot Township, using Perth as an example, they have 120 and we have 90 meters, sorry. If a study comes back and says that we should go to 120, is that how it would work with regards to setbacks? Or is that something that we could ask once we see the site plans, that we would ask for the 120 setback? while we've got 90 as a guideline, could that change based on what comes back, scientific studies based on all of the dust and noise and et cetera, et cetera? We're not locked into the 90 if we see a reason for the 120. Is that correct?
Thank you, Armstrong. Through you to Councillor Gordick. That's correct. Those studies would ultimately serve to provide the basis for whatever setbacks may be more restrictive than the ARA, and certainly each individual application with the appropriate setbacks for that specific application. So there would be that opportunity to use the setbacks that come out of that process, or certainly council can make recommendations for increased setbacks. However, in general, we would suggest that those setbacks would have to be based on the individual merits of the application and the scientific documents that support the setbacks being proposed. But the answer is yes, each application looks at setbacks individually as they relate to that development and ARA regulations.
Councillor Hallman.
Thanks, Mayor. I actually have now 2 questions because I have a question following Councillor Gordick's question. If Mr. Martin could explain that to me. So if everything is variable based on what's going on, why wouldn't we set like really excellent boundaries to meet at to protect the community than, you know, for not the 90 versus 120, for example? I just feel like I could use more clarification, because 120 in my mind, if that was in my backyard, it would just be a little bit, you know, it's just that much more protection. So why not have the 120 as the benchmark, but then have the flexibility still if it can be changed no matter what?
Thanks for that question, through Mayor Armstrong. Ultimately, the basis for setbacks is the Aggregate Resources Act. So the ARA dictates setback requirements, and that's the baseline. Anything above and beyond that, or I guess in theory less than that, would need to be based on the applications that are reviewed by the appropriate professionals in those specific areas in support of an application. So that's what I was suggesting, is that some municipalities don't include any setback requirements because ultimately the baseline for aggregate operations is the Aggregate Resources Act. So if specifics were to be included, the appropriate setbacks to include would be the duplication of the ARA regulations within the bylaw, and that would be the baseline for the application, which it is presently, whether it's in the bylaw or not. And then any increases to that would be based on the individual application there, without having a specific reason for increasing. There's really no merit in doing that. Like, we could introduce you know, a significantly large setback that would essentially say that we can't have any gravel pits within Wilmot Township, but then a specific person or applicant can apply to amend those regulations. So whether it's a 120 meter setback, a 90 meter setback, or a 20 kilometer setback, the application is still filed and the same studies and same analysis is completed. So the baseline measurement really isn't of significance other than the ARA, because every other application or every other setback that's applied is reviewed based on that individual application and the individual merits of that application.
A follow-up, Mayor? Thank you, through the Mayor. So then why would the example that we were given on the chart, like West Perth, have 120? Why would?
Through Mayor Armstrong, I can't speak to why that specific municipality chose. It may be on, sometimes the zoning that's in a bylaw is crafted based on an application that was filed in a specific area and then is used as the standard. Like we have some, for instance, our townhome zoning was based on a specific development, and that was proposed, you know, at the time that zoning was put in place. That became the standard within that zone and then is modified subsequently when applications are filed. I would hazard a guess that perhaps that was the same instance, that it was applied based on a specific application and that became their standard. And then again, any person can make an application for an aggregate operation and would deal with those setbacks through that process.
One more, oh, sorry, I see Harold has a question.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong and Councillor Holman, I was just going to add, I agree with Mr. Martin, obviously. I think another way to look at it is it may be a bit of a marketing exercise for them to create a false sense of security, perhaps, or maybe not. But I think what we're looking at here is we can put whatever number we want in, but I think the reality of aggregate applications is that they're all site specific. There is no defined or predetermined you must comply to X, because every applicant can apply to propose what they want. They simply have to justify it. So that's the reason why the base standard is the ARA. We could propose 500 meters, as Mr. Martin said, 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers. It doesn't, in theory, you can put whatever you want into the bylaw. It just creates a false sense of, hey, they can't be within 10 kilometers of my property. The reality is they can apply tomorrow to be within 10 kilometers of the property. So the difference between 90 meters and 120 meters isn't significant. But what Mr. Martin is suggesting is that you know, in the example, I think he said West Perth being so different than everyone else's is it's probably a bit of a, for lack of a better word, a political marketing exercise. And it's certainly not probably based on any scientific proof that has to be adhered to on every gravel pit, because we know that many pits are within 15 meters of a property line.
I do have one more question through the mayor. The original question I was going to ask. Thank you. So I'm just curious if the industry, the aggregate industry, commented at all on the recommendations that the citizen group put forward, and if they had any questions, comments, or concerns about anything in those that they put forward.
Through Mayor Armstrong, we did circulate to the Stone, Sand and Gravel Association the report, along with the comments that were provided from Citizens for Safe Groundwater, and we did not receive any responses on that. There were no comments received from that organization.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yep.
So is it typical for this, as you said, it's called the Sand and Gravel Association, is it typical for them to, when something is circulated to them, to provide comment like it doesn't affect them either way, or they're in support, or they object something that comes through in that way, in your experience?
Through your Mayor Armstrong, typically we don't circulate the Stone, Sand and Gravel Association on any applications. Certainly all of the aggregate producers are part of that organization in terms of being regulated, but we don't circulate them on zone change applications or any application related to aggregate operations, as they're not an agency that the Planning Act lists, or nor have they been have they requested to be notified of applications. So this would be the first time that we've ever reached out to the organization for comments. We simply provided that notification to ensure that if there were comments, they were balanced in terms of both the aggregate operators as well as the Citizens for Safe Groundwater. But again, there were no comments received through that requested certification or circulation.
Okay, thank you. Just one more follow-up. So if, I don't know, like I'm just thinking if I reset something in healthcare, just in my reality that I live in, just to create a parallel, I would receive, I would think that if they had an objection, they would probably have commented. Is that a fair assumption?
Through Mayor Armstrong, I can't assume that what the situation would be, but they did receive a report suggesting that we were not introducing any regulations that weren't consistent with the Aggregated Resources Act. So for that reason, I would suspect that they were okay with keeping status quo. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, just to clarify. So I see. So they had no comment on our report, which included the comments from, so they didn't specifically comment on, gotcha. Okay, thank you. That clarifies my question for me.
Councillor Fenning.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. I feel like I'm belaboring the point, but I just about the setbacks and the decision making specifically. I think that a lot of people view our ability to create bylaws as a piece of autonomy for our community. And most people that I talk to assume that if we put something in a bylaw, that is a rule that we can make specifically for our community. And my understanding from this is that, in fact, in this particular case, that is not true. That if we put in a setback of, since we're picking on Perth, we'll continue picking on Perth. If we followed that and said 120 meters, any hypothetical application that came to council, if they requested a reduction of that setback and provided all of the environmental scans required and data required to prove that it met the ARA requirements for a different setback, we would not have the authority, even as the elected officials within Wilmot Township, to say that we refuse it and stick to our bylaw. Is that correct?
Through your Mayor Armstrong, I wouldn't suggest that the council has the ability to create whatever regulations they want. However, there needs to be an ability to back up the reasons for introducing that setback. So as you suggested, if they prepared numerous studies and ultimately supported a reduced setback and in conformity with ARA regulations, then it would be difficult to implement a setback that's larger than that because there's no scientific merit to justify it. So it would be difficult to support that that requirement when appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal.
A follow-up, if I may. I think that's something that's very important to understand and be cognizant of in this particular conversation. While there are a variety of bylaws that we make, we do have overarching rules in the province and set by the province that we do not have the ability to supersede. And I know that there are a lot of municipalities where people are not happy with aggregate zoning decisions. And I may, whatever I think of a situation or whatever I think of the regulation, the reality is that is not set at this level. And I think, we have to really be conscious of the impact to our community if we set something that we can't stand behind, and then we end up going to LPAT. And, I think I'm just going to speak to the community for a moment and say that I'm a farmer. I care about the land. I care about the environment. So, these decisions are difficult, but we have regulations that are not set here in this community and are not directed by our staff. And so this conversation is a really hard one for me.
Thank you. Councillor Gordick.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Just sort of as a bit of a follow-up to Councillor Fenning, with what she's saying with regards to our limitations within our own jurisdiction, legal jurisdiction. Because of things such as climate change and other issues that we're dealing with, and some of the dust and toxic wind, everything sort of seems to be changing, and we are needing to do better as we move forward. That being said, does the township get involved with moving this conversation further up the chain to the province level? Have we looked at changing or getting involved with the bylaws? And I'm sure you guys have. I'm just asking the question so that the public also knows as well. Do we, have we proposed changes so that those kind of things are taken into account? Can we stop using as much aggregate and use other recyclable methods going forward. So just kind of wondering if we furthered the conversation.
I think Mr. Okrafka has his hand up. I'll defer to him on this.
I'm simply going to respond through you, Mayor Armstrong, to Councillor Gorgic, that council is free to make whatever statements they want to the province of Ontario. At the staff level, it's a little bit different because we have a duty to process applications in accordance with the PPS and the Planning Act. We have a duty to, the provincial policy statement basically says that the goal of the province is to get as much gravel out of the ground as possible and to in no way limit the amount unless it's justified to limit that amount. So as Councillor Fenning was indicating, that, you know, we can set a standard, but we have to be able to justify that standard, and pulling a number out of the air, whether it's 120 or 10 kilometers, without the scientific justification of why that number is being put in place, puts us basically probably at LPAT every time we deal with trying to uphold a standard that's not justified. So it's not that you can't, but in terms of those bigger policy things like supply and demand, the PPS specifically says that a municipality shall not look at the existing licensed supply within a municipality as a determinant in whether you will approve a new plan or consider it. That's not something that staff can necessarily advocate for or against, but council is free to write whatever letters you want on whatever side of the political spectrum you are. As a group, obviously council has to have a majority opinion, I believe, to say something on behalf of the township, but as individuals, you're free to make whatever statements you want of whatever political color.
Councillor Hallman.
Thank you, through the mayor. Because this report is for information right now, is it possible for staff to reach out to that other municipality we've discussed to see if there was, what the reason was, and share that with council about the 120 versus other municipalities choosing 90? Is it, or should we reach out politically to other elected officials there? I'm just wondering what you advise.
Through Mayor Armstrong, we can certainly ask that question. Yeah, get back to you.
Okay, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Fisher.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. So getting back to the setbacks again, no matter what, it would revert to 90 meters. I'm just wondering why Clarington would have 30 meters on there. Do they not have to follow the ARA?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Ultimately the standard is the ARA, but if through the studies that are prepared in support of application, and if the Ministry of Natural Resources were supportive of a lesser setback, there is the opportunity to look at something less than the ARA standards. So as far as the 30-meter setback, it could very well be that they have dated regulations, or they propose that setback to be in place in the event that they were to get approval for a lesser setback from the Ministry of Natural Resources. So there could be a couple of reasons why they have that lesser setback, but ultimately, you know, the standard is ARA unless you have A, zoning approval, and B, approval from the Ministry of Natural Resources to look at a setback either lesser or greater than the requirements of the ARA.
Have to get an automatic unmute. Anyway, so we have a couple of delegations to speak on this, and before we commence with hearing from the delegations, I would like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. Delegations will be allotted 5 minutes to speak, and there will be a timer displayed for you to monitor your time. When the timer reaches 0, or you have finished your delegation before the 5 minutes, council will be asked if they have any questions for you. We ask that you leave the meeting once your delegation has concluded. You are then welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting being webcast live via YouTube. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate muting and removal from the meeting: interrupting counselors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about counselors, staff, or others, hate speech or defamatory comments. The purpose of your delegation is to address council, not question staff. Council will not be answering questions during your presentation. And I will now call upon the delegations, and the first delegation is Samantha Lernout and Alan Ramsey. Hello, Samantha.
Hello, good evening.
Okay,
So-
Samantha, I understand that you have a presentation to put up.
Am I putting it up, or I think you guys have it?
IT is going to put it up, and I understand you won't be able to see the clock. So can you
I've
see?
timed it. I should be less than 5 minutes. Most
Okay.
definitely.
Okay, we'll give you, if you go longer, we'll let you know when you've got a minute left.
Okay, and all that conversation should make this even quicker. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for your time this evening. Before we get into the recommendations for best practices that was completed by professional planner Alan Ramsey, I'll just take a quick moment to outline why we feel that this opportunity to revise our bylaws in Wilmot as they pertain to aggregate is so important in Wilmot Township. Next slide, please. So as council, as you are well aware, water sources often overlap with significant deposits of sand, gravel, and other mineral aggregate resources in Wilmot Township. Next slide, please. As you're also well aware, there is potential to impact the quality and quantity of water according to the region. Next slide, please. So on top of our water and aggregate resources in Wilmot, we also have healthy, thriving rural communities that are worth protecting. Next slide, please. The last thing I just want to quickly mention before I get into our recommendations in the report, just for anybody watching on YouTube, my understanding of bylaws, what are bylaws? And this was a very interesting conversation to start this with. A zoning bylaw, to my understanding, implements the objectives and policies of a local municipality's official plan. Such things as lot sizes, setbacks, buffers, vehicular access, environmentally sensitive areas, wellhead and source water protection, and sustainability of the land for the proposed use may be included in a zoning bylaw, whether or not that aligns with the ARA. Bylaws set the local standard, making it clear for all parties what is considered safe and acceptable practice in our township for the betterment of all. Rather than deferring to the aggregate license policy and dealing with these applications on an ad hoc basis, setting the standards beforehand does seem to be a little bit more progressive and proactive. Next slide, please. So we would like to, number one, show our support for the existing standards that have been set within the township and urge that these standards be upheld. And number two, we would also like to recommend the following revisions and additions based on best practices of neighboring municipalities, which I'm grateful that everyone's had a chance to look at and discuss. Next slide, please. So the community commissioned just before I get started on this slide, the community commissioned Mr. Ramsey to complete a review and report of best practices based back in the summer of last year. Alan Ramsey is a University of Waterloo graduate, 30 years in planning sector, including consulting work with local municipalities. He provides expert testimony at the provincial level at LPAT. He held senior positions with the Township of Oakville, City of Burlington planning departments. Mr. Ramsey is available for questions after this delegation. We are confident that Mr. Ramsey's work with the community to explore best practices in neighboring communities for Wilmot is highly valuable for Wilmot as a whole. So this is the first recommendation. There's four that we have to discuss. So this has to do with permitted uses. So due to Wilmot's location on top of regional recharge, sensitive not even just regional, but sensitive recharge areas, we suggest that wash ponds be added as a restricted use. So requiring that extra level of review. Next slide, please. Second recommendation is that a lot of conversation on setbacks. Next slide, please. Third recommendation is creating a standard berm height. As you see that image is Snyder's Road. That's the Keyswater repurposing, no berms at all. Next slide, please.
You're down to 45 seconds.
Okay, third is a buffer area to protect communities. Buffer areas is yeah, I'll go. Next slide, please. And this is just tying into the Wilmot strategic plan. We are confident that these recommendations do reflect the goals of Wilmot's strategic plan. And last slide, please. So we do urge Mayor and Council to take full advantage of this opportunity to ask questions to Mr. Ramsey. His report and findings are on the last few slides if needed for reference. We have also shared an annotated table from Wilmot staff report that highlights the municipalities which you all had a look at, and identifies the township as lacking in standards and where the township standards appear to be less than what best practices follow in other municipalities. I understand that best practices we're kind of talking about it like it's a hard line, but I see it more as a spectrum. And Alan Ramsey, yeah,
that's your time,
all.
Samantha.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions from council to either Ms. Leonard or Mr. Ramsey? Councillor Hallman.
Thank you for your presentation, Samantha and Mr. Ramsey. Mr. Ramsey, I received a lot of emails over the last few days, maybe like 70 or so, about people commenting in the community on the recommendations that you made. And I wasn't going to ask any questions, but then I'm just was thinking, well, I've got you here and you're in front of me, so I might as well. I'm just wondering if you can comment on how you feel about our current bylaws that are in place right now.
Well, certainly, first off, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. Currently, the township's bylaws, I would say, are relatively modest in terms of how they deal with aggregate resources. They certainly don't provide the basis under which staff could be making comments on applications. So one of the fundamental issues, I think, is the lack of a basis for making recommendations on applications. And certainly the standards in the zoning bylaw, when you're providing comments to the Minister of Natural Resources, carries some weight in terms of what is desirable in this municipality for standards. And certainly when you don't have any standards, it's difficult to make submissions, whether it's to the province or whether it's to the Ontario Land Tribunal, on what you believe to be an acceptable standard when your bylaw doesn't even include a standard. And I've been involved in hearings where local municipalities have attempted to introduce standards beyond what was being sought through the application, and it was often the fact that the township didn't have any standards in its bylaw was used as a detriment as to that there was no basis for making a recommendation for a different standard. Certainly, the standards that are in the Aggregate Resources Act are simply a starting point, and they shouldn't be viewed as the end point. And that's what the license application is about, is determining what the appropriate standard is. And it's important for the municipality to have as a basis, what is an acceptable standard in this municipality for things like setbacks and buffering and so on.
Go ahead. Councilor Almond, go ahead.
Oh, great, thank you. I just have another follow-up question. So when we're talking about the setbacks that we were discussing, just because my brain is down this path now, just curious what your perspective of, so when one municipality is off here in 120 and then others are down here in 30, abutting a residential area, is it, so with going to the province, is it like, do you see that that is appropriate for elected officials to advocate to the province for that?
Well, I don't necessarily believe it's the role of the council to be the advocate. You know, I certainly believe as a professional planner that standards should be determined, and there should be a strong basis for those standards, and those standards should be used when you are commenting on applications. And so, you know, I guess I need to respond to the staff comment about the suggestion that setbacks of 10 kilometers or 20 kilometers should be applied. That is absolutely not what's being said here. I believe the standards that have been put forward to you are reasonable and appropriate for the context, and they differ only slightly from the standards of the Aggregate Resources Act, and they're not intended in any way to stymie a proposal or an application. They're what I believe as a professional planner are appropriate standards for this type of facility.
Thank you. Councillor Fanning?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. Sorry, I'm just not 100% clear. So are you saying then that we can set bylaw setback requirements, for example, that exceed the ARA and requirements, and that the applications reporting that comes as part of the application process would not provide basis for them to appeal and therefore win at an LPAT hearing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if you set the standard or the bar here, and that becomes then it becomes the responsibility of the applicant to justify why they should have a lower standard. And if they do have a lower standard, if it's determined that they have a lower standard through the Aggregate Resources licensing process, including because the license application must comply with the zoning bylaw. So through that process, you would need to amend the zoning bylaw with respect to the land subject to the application to apply a lower standard. And that's all fair game through that licensing process. I mean, essentially, it's you set a standard, and through that process, it either goes up or it goes down, depending upon what the studies and the submissions and the peer reviews of those studies and submissions determine.
A follow-up, if I may?
Yes, go ahead.
So then just this isn't my area of expertise, clearly. But, you know, so when we're looking at the setbacks that our bylaw requires, or any other requirements that our bylaw may provide, is it then, so what you're saying is that there is value in having a standard that is harder to meet and therefore require all applications to submit a rigorous evidence of a reason that we should reduce those setbacks or other requirements, and that the ARA does not provide a minimum that we have to follow. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, so just a couple things. One is, I'm not suggesting that the township impose a standard that's hard. I'm suggesting that you should apply a standard that's appropriate and reflective of the values that this council and the staff place on the issues of, for example, nuisance or the typical issues that arise through a pit or quarry application. And it may be separation distances between the working phase and residential. It may be making sure that areas where things are processed are separated from receivers, like schools and residences where there's potential impact. So to identify what you believe to be the appropriate standard, and then if through the licensing application process, someone can determine that a lower standard is possible, that's fair game. And it's similarly, if through that process it's determined that in a unique circumstance, a higher standard should be applied, that's appropriate too. But right now, the standards that are set out in the Aggregate Resources Act are the bare minimum. I know of very few applications where those minimum standards continue to apply, because through the license application process, things change. And I just believe it's important for a local municipality to determine the standards that they believe should be applied when looking at applications and as applications go forward in terms of actual construction or taking of soil or aggregate from the ground.
Mr. Krafka, did you want to comment?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Armstrong, I just emphasize again that all these studies that are required as part of the application process, current applications, you've seen them posted, noise analysis, dust analysis, all the setback distances from property lines are based on very specific peer-reviewed, multiple peer reviews, studies of what the appropriate setbacks are based on the topography of the site, the nature of the site, the proposal of the site, whether it's sand and gravel, whether it be crushing on site. Each gravel application, each aggregate application is unique and has a site-specific application. So what staff are indicating is that the appropriate means to determine the appropriate setbacks on a case-by-case basis is based on the science of that application. It's not that you simply accept the application as proposed. As you know, we've done peer reviews on all the studies. The current application, residents have also done peer reviews. So the goal is to get the best answer for each site. Some sites might be, again, not 10 kilometers, but it's a bit of, but say it's 500 meters is the appropriate setback. By saying 120 is acceptable, then you somewhat set the stage that, that a lesser is better. And it's not what the standard is saying that we put in the bylaw. It's our process and our official plan policies that require the detailed studies to be submitted, to be peer reviewed, to determine on a site-specific basis, based on noise, based on, topography, berm height, for example. The berm height is highly dependent on the noise being generated and the proximity of receptors. There's some sites where there may not be berms, but what staff are trying to say is that to set a standard creates, without it being based on some scientific factor. So changing our bylaw to just say we're going from 90 to 120, based on what? Based on that's the highest one we've seen in another bylaw, or based on some scientific knowledge that we have that says 120 is better than 90, because that's where we get to, well, if 120 is better than 90, 200 is better than 90 as well. But regardless of what we set, it's going to have a detailed studies done, and the applicants will always propose to get, you know, the reduced standard as much as they can while complying with provincial law on things like noise, dust, all those various studies that we do. So from a staff perspective, I think we agree, and we're just wording it differently, is setting a standard is fine. We have standards in the bylaw. It doesn't mean that we have no standards that have to be adhered to. The studies required for each application are exactly the same, and it's all based on all the factors of each site is unique, right? So from a staff perspective, that's all we're saying, is that let's not paint a false representation to abutting neighbors of proposed pits that 120 meters is a gold standard that's going to be adhered to, because the reality is on every application, it's going to be a site-specific proposal.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fisher.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, and thanks, Mr. Ramsey, for joining us tonight. On the chart provided by the township, actually, I'll back it up a bit. Citizens for Safe Groundwater, one of the recommendations was a buffer. And I just looked at the chart provided by the township, and out of all the communities listed, only 2 of them, Ottawa listed 15 meters and Hamilton 6 meters. So I guess 2 questions. Does ARA have a set buffer in their policies? And secondly, what would you recommend as a buffer?
So I don't believe there is a standard in the aggregate resources regulations for buffer. But certainly buffers are integral features in aggregate operations. And so there's 2 things. There's actually 3 components to it. There is the width of the buffer, there's the height of the buffer, and there is the extent of vegetation that might be required to be planted on top of the buffer to provide further visual and or noise screening, for example. So in the hearings that I've been involved in on this matter, buffers have always been required, and they're typically in the order of 6 to 9 meters wide, and there is quite a variation in height. So I'm not sure if I could give you a definitive answer in terms of the height of a buffer or the extent of vegetation that's required, but certainly a buffer of 6 to 9 meters is what I see on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hammond.
Sorry, thank you for the mayor. I have been writing sticky notes to ask some follow-up questions while others were talking. So I'll start with my pile of sticky notes here. I guess my first question is going to be, so currently we have, I think it's, looking here, the stockpiling. We don't have anything for that. Is that correct, Mr. Kraftbeck, from what I'm looking at the chart?
I don't have, I've got my screen up, but I don't believe we have a stockpile specific location or height. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't have a standard. It's that each site, the applicant has to specifically propose how they're going to manage that site and do the studies based on the proximity of the receptors, etc., to justify their plan. Then we peer review it. The region reviews it, GRCA reviews it, And public may hire consultants to review it as well. And at the end of the day, all that will be provided to council, and council gets to make the decision on what they feel is appropriate for that site.
Okay, thank you. And a follow-up, I think, from Mr. Okrafka. So with the items we have now, with where we've set our numbers, do we have, when we're saying it's science-based, do we have the science that reinforces that, or is it, are we just always deferring to the ARA? I'm just trying to understand.
No, the science is, we will have, through you, Mayor Armstrong, sorry for protocol, through you, Mayor Armstrong and Councillor Holman, we will have the science on each application, just as all the other pits in the township have gone through the same process, and council has made a decision based on those applications and reviewing them. So each site's unique, and so the standards that are in the bylaw are the same ones that were in the bylaw when I started. If you, like, it comes down to resources. To change standards based on this is universally a true statement that we need X, you're going to need to hire professional acoustic engineers and everyone else to determine. It's not a role for a planner to pull out of the air and say, I think 120 meters covers you off for any setbacks. It's going to be based on noise emissions and everything else from the site. So it's not, as a professional planner, I can't justify to you why we go from 90 to 120 without that science that the applicants will be supplying as part of the application. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's not that we're trying to not have standards. It's that we recognize that, you know, a flat site surrounded by houses has completely different standards that will end up being required than a hilly site, which perhaps, you know, no one even knows it's there, right? The size, the quantity coming out of the ground, the nature of, you know, the material coming out. Does it need to be crushed? Does it not need to be crushed? All those factors play into things like berm height, berm width, setbacks from neighbors, sensitive receptors, all of those factors. So again, I probably sound like I'm a record going round and round with the same thing. Each site is site specific. We review it on its merits, technical studies to support, peer reviewed, and council. At the end of the day, you get to make the decision on all of these applications as councillors on whether you feel the science justifies the setback. So when you review these reports, you're the one making the vote on the applications, not staff. You'll be making that decision on whether you feel the science justifies what's being proposed. And if you don't, then you get to propose what you want or make a decision to not support it. But we get the information collected and bring it to you, and then you make your decision.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gordick.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, this will be to Mr. Okrafka or Mr. Martin. And just again, like Councillor Benning, it's not my strength, so I just wanted to add some clarifications. First one, difference between a buffer and a berm, because of the fact that the Citizens for Safe Groundwater has put both of those in as a suggestion. So I'm just wanting clarification as to what is the difference on those two, please. And I have other questions.
Through Mayor Armstrong, so the buffer would be the distance from a property line or a feature, and the berm would be an actual physically constructed mitigation measure, whether it be a fence, a hill, or landscaping. So it's a, and we have implemented those through other gravel pit operations. It may not be a standard that's listed within the ARA or within the zoning bylaw, but certainly has been implemented through gravel pits within Wilmot Township.
Thank you. So go ahead, Samantha, you wanted to make a quick comment on that, just so that I finish up.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the buffer is what is sort of the vegetation or whatever is built on the berm, or within, like a setback is the distance, where the buffer is whatever you put on the berm that helps to buffer the impact, and the berm is the berm.
Is that correct, Mr. Martin?
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Through Mayor Armstrong, well, the vegetation within the buffer is, as Ms. Lerner has described, but we were speaking of distances, so there would be a prescribed width of a buffer area, and the berm and vegetation within that is the actual feature that's creating the buffer within that specified distance.
So then for my other parts of the questions, because of all the information coming up. So to speak to Mr. Ramsey and Mr. Krafka, I just wanted to see, as sort of like Mr. Ramsey has said, a sort of a gold standard, and I understand what you're saying about science and site specific, totally on board with that. However, if we do have set higher standards, let's say like 10-foot berms, or 3-meter berms, sorry, it's going metric, 3-meter berms, you know, 120 setback, and the applicant does end up, we agree with that, and then the applicant ends up going to LPAT to say, I don't agree with that. Wouldn't that sort of set, as Mr. Ramsey has said, something at LPAT to sort of say, this is what we expect, and to sort of add to our argument? Whereas if we say that we're just accepting of lesser because the ARA, it's kind of like lowering your standards, so to speak. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit, because it was something that kind of caught my eye, or caught my hearing, with regards to sort of setting a gold standard versus just a regular standard. And then to follow up with what you're saying about site specific and science, what is the science that the ARA has to set 90? So, and I'm not sure if you can answer that because we're not the ARA, but just, yeah.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, to Councillor Gordick, on your first question. Yeah, if council wants to set a gold standard, the difficulty for staff at LPAT would be, should the member say, why does Wilmot have 120 meters? What's the science behind that? The answer would be, there is no science behind it. It's a number that council put in place without any scientific justification to create a gold standard. That would be the honest answer that I would give them. Not trying to be difficult, just it's not a number based on science. It's a number simply based on being a big number. Again, that's, you can do that, but as a planner, I would represent where that number came from. It was not based on any specific acoustical study that said 120 is our standard that has to be achieved. Again, each site is different. With respect to ARA and how they created their standards, I have no idea, but they're part of the Aggregate Resources Act, and that's where it starts and stops for staff. Is when they're in the act, I don't challenge. It's like MDS arcs for minimum distance separation from a house to a barn. Do I question the science that Ministry of Agriculture and Food created the number based on? No, I don't. I just apply the standard. That's the process. So in a gravel pit, certainly ARA standards are minimum standard, but they're the ministry starting point, and then through the study and the peer reviews of those studies. It's not like the applicants just come in and say, well, we like 10 as a number, so we want 10. They have to justify that 10 complies with provincial law for all the various aspects. We peer review that to get a second opinion. Often there's a third opinion from residents, peer reviews as well. And then, as I've indicated previously, all of that information comes to you, and you as a councillor get to make the decision. So you hold the power at the end of the day to set for each application what the buffers will be, how high the berms will be, what the setback to sensitive receptors. You control all of that, and you'll have all the scientific documents there suggesting what's appropriate, and you get to pick what you feel is appropriate. As a group, you'll make a decision, either to support it, to not support it, or to modify it, and then ultimately it will go to LPAT, and LPAT will probably make a decision. I'm not saying that all gravel pits go to LPAT. In fact, we never had one go to LPAT in Wilmot Township. We've always been able to come up through those processes of public consultation with solutions that worked. It may not have made everybody ecstatic, but I'm not aware that we've been to LPAT on a gravel pit. Again, there may have been pits that went, but in recent years, all those approvals have been able to be managed, if you will, to meet the concerns of residents at the same time dealing with the approval of the pits. So hopefully that's of assistance.
No, it does. And then last one, with regards to some of the biggest concerns that we've had hearing from citizens of Safe Groundwater is obviously our water and source protection water where we are. Would that also then pertain to the wash ponds being restricted within that? So again, that would be site specific, and that we could do that as well if that was a condition. It's not part of, would that be part of an ARA as well standard, or just that would be site, like for us as a bylaw?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, Councilor Gordy. So groundwater protection in Waterloo region, the benefit we have in Waterloo region is we have an expert group at the region of Waterloo whose job all day, every day is to protect the groundwater. They review each application. They demand what they want to see in terms of studies. They review it. In this case, it was also peer reviewed, not once, but twice. Again, getting off the subject of the general nature of this and more into a specific, but groundwater is always a foremost concern in the region of Waterloo. And I can assure you that wash ponds, groundwater impacts are reviewed by the region of Waterloo on a site-specific basis for every application. And that you can trust that the region of Waterloo again, we're blessed in Waterloo region. We have an entire division out the region of Waterloo whose only job is to protect our groundwater. So I don't know that for a small municipality, we can ask for much more than that.
Councillor Hallman.
Thank you, through the mayor. I'm just looking to clarify one thing with the ARA, just because I'm used to living in with Mr. Molyneux's in the minimum maintenance standards. Is ARA the minimum standard, or is it, I know that we're talking about the science, but I'm just looking to make a parallel. Is that, if you can clarify that for me?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, I would treat it as a minimum standard.
Okay, thank you for that. And follow up, Mayor Armstrong?
Yes.
Thank you, through you, to Mr. Ramsey. Before I think I'm done my questions this evening, but since I know the active community has engaged and brought you here in front of Wilmot Council tonight, just looking if there's any other comments that you want to leave us with to digest as we're looking at this report for information before it comes back next time.
No, I just one comment, and that's really that I was asked to come tonight not to talk about the application, but to talk about what I believe were the appropriate standards for the municipality in the zoning bylaw. And so I come at it from that perspective, having participated in lots of aggregate applications. And I don't necessarily consider the standards that have been recommended to be gold standards. I consider them to be reasonable standards that are appropriate for the context. Certainly, many of them are above the standards of the minimum standards in the Aggregate Resources Act regulations. But just to be clear, they're not necessarily the minimum standards, because through the application process, those standards can be reduced.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ramsey. Are there any further questions? Sorry, Samantha, you only get to speak once. So, okay. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much, Samantha and Alan. Thank you for coming and appreciate your presentation. Thank you. Our next delegation is Mr. Rory Farnan.
Good evening.
Good evening, Rory. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, you have your 5 minutes. Can you see the clock on the on your monitor?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good evening. Planning's review of its aggregate bylaws looked at the top 10 aggregate producing municipalities in Ontario. It's my understanding our neighbor, North Dumfries, is ranked third with approximately 47 active or inactive sites, the majority not having been rehabilitated. This got me wondering, does Wilmot want to be a top 10 producer of aggregate, abandoning its roots as an agriculture first community? Are these top 10 the communities Wilmot wants to measure up against? I would suggest it might be too late for these top 10 communities to be proactive. Look at how Aggregate has changed the landscape of those communities. Do you want Wilmot to follow down that same path? I want to share a few experiences from residents of North Dumfries with the hope that their experience brings perspective to the importance of progressive positive change. In a recent letter to the editor titled "The Pillage of North Dumfries," Alex writes, "Everywhere you drive in this township, you see a hole in the ground, from a gravel pit or the remnants of one. It is pretty eye-opening even now when you fly over in a plane and see the devastation to once a beautiful place. I suggest we rename the township Scarred Earth or simply Gravel Pit Township. That way visitors know what to expect when they get here." And then there's Tamara, a long-standing resident of North Dumfries. Tamara is quoted as saying, "We're just surrounded. When they first came here more than 20 years ago, gravel pits were just on the edge of Cambridge and the 401. But since then, they've been coming towards us. We used to be able to bike up and down this road when we were kids. Now I don't even like going to get the mail. It's miserable." And then there is her worship of North Dumfries, Miss Foxton, who was quoted in a June article about gravel pits saying, "Is this what we want Ontario to look like?" I'd like to ask Council, is the plight of gravel pits in North Dumfries the same experience we want for Wilmot? Our 2020 strategic plan, which with images of farmland to visualize the strength of our community, suggests goals like environmental protection and quality of life. It identifies core values like health, well-being, community, legacy, and forward thinking. Well, forward thinking requires constant improvement. In this case, the strengthening of our bylaws. Because, as Mr. O'Krafka has suggested, every property in Wilmot could be an existing gravel pit, and Wilmot would still need to consider an application. The report in front of you today is not only based on communities that have already lost a part of their identity, but it also suggests that no changes be enacted. It suggests there are no improvements to be made. I doubt the Aggregate lobby, no doubt the Aggregate lobby is okay with this, but I challenge that notion as a resident of Wilmot Township. In 20 years, we will look back at this moment and ask ourselves why we didn't do better. If there is anything possible that we can do today, we must take action. For example, the enhancement of our existing setback within the current bylaw, however insignificant it may seem, would make a difference. As the report stands today, I am asking this council to amend the report to include the public's input that the township requested as part of the public consultation process. The public has responded. Many of you have heard that response, not only over the last several months, but in the last few days. The public have responded with revisions that are backed by a 30-year planner with municipal experience, including that at the provincial level. We know better, we can do better. Let's be a better township. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rory. Are there any questions of Mr. Farner? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Rory.
Cheers, good night.
So that brings us to the recommendation that report DS 2021-023 be received for information. That is moved by Councillor Fisher, Councillor Fanning. All in favor? That is carried. Okay. I think right now, I'd like to suggest maybe a 5-minute bio break. I think that would be appropriate. Got a thumbs up. That's good. So we'll be back here in 5 minutes. You can put the clock up. So the next item is from Parks and Facilities. It's the emergency repairs to township facilities.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. Through you to council, 2 emergency repair projects required immediate attention for health and safety reasons, and they were completed under the emergency repair clause of the procurement bylaw. And Mr. Kelly is here if you have any questions specific to that bylaw. The existing capital budget included a project to replace the HVAC unit on the rooftop of the New Hamburg Library due to end of life. This was actually slated for 2019 and had some delays with COVID. And when we went to pursue that project this year, we had concerns, staff had concerns about the integrity of the roof system. So we brought in an engineer who confirmed that the roof required replacement before we could replace the HVAC system. HVAC system could not operate this winter without being done. Therefore, this project was approved through the Director of Corporate Services under that procurement bylaw. The second emergency replacement was with respect to the Wilmot Recreation Complex, the refrigeration plant. We had a heat exchanger failure, and that resulted in it being locked and tagged out by a contractor for safety reasons. And in order to complete that work prior to reopening and putting the ice back in after both pads being out for the summer due to COVID, the emergency repair was undertaken. And I'm happy to answer any questions if council has any questions. Thanks.
Councillor Gordick.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, to Ms. Jackson. Fine with the emergency repairs, just as a sort of a follow-up to that. Are there, because of COVID and some of the health and safety regulations or recommendations that are coming out with HVAC and improvement of air quality, are there other situations, maybe not necessarily emergency repairs, but have our other facilities been looked at? And I'm just asking, I don't want to assume that we don't take care of our staff, so please, I'm not coming at it from that perspective, but just wondering if there's other HVAC updates that we are looking at within the township, other facilities, based on obviously public health recommendations going forward.
And through the mayor, that's an excellent question, Councillor Gordick. We are looking at HVAC across all our facilities. We are currently underway replacing all the HVAC equipment throughout the whole administrative complex that serves Castle Kilbride and the admin complex. It's a significant project that council approved earlier this year, a lot of money, but a really great improvement. This unit that's going on top of the library has an economizer with it, which will improve the amount of fresh air. And I have been on many, many meetings throughout the last year and a half with respect to HVAC systems and what should be done, for everything from the types of filtration we include to what units need to be replaced, to other methods of providing filtration and air quality improvements for staff. There are a couple of community centers that we are currently looking at, and we will be reviewing all of those within the next year to ensure that everything is the best it can be for what is possible within those facilities.
Follow up then through Mayor. Just as an aside, since you've mentioned that, is that something that can go on the work plan, just that we can keep abreast of that as going forward? Just I know that I've just asked the question. I didn't notice it on the work plan, but being that it's sort of something that we can keep our eye on, that would be great. Appreciate that.
Yeah, through the mayor, it is part of the COVID protocols within the work plan. So that is one of the regular meetings that I attend regionally, is with a group of facilities folks who are looking into all of these specific items. So it is reflected in the work plan under COVID.
Perfect. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none. The recommendation that report PRFS 2021-016 regarding emergency repairs to township facilities be received for information purposes. And that is moved by Councillor Gordick, seconded by Councillor Gerber. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next up is the open air bylaw. You're up, Chief.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. First, I wanted to acknowledge the support and input from our fire prevention officer, bylaw, and legal department. Having these resources available has made a tremendous positive contribution to this extensive bylaw review. Over the last couple of years, fire prevention suppression has experienced issues with how the current bylaw functions and integrates with the community. After an extensive review of our existing burn bylaw comparators and motivated to provide a more inclusive bylaw, we're pleased to present tonight's report. The main proposed changes are directed at legacy permits, lot sizes, time with which recreational fires occur, burning of yard waste and prohibited materials such as cardboard and paper, to name a few, increased safety measures on agricultural properties. Our goal was to find a balance for the community that permits recreational fires that provide some relief from all-day burning practices, allow smaller lot sizes to safely conduct recreational fires, increase the safety and bylaw requirement messaging to residents annually when applying for permits, and improve air quality concerns. Extensive research has been conducted with several comparator municipalities to identify successes of their respective burn bylaws. Coupled with a community survey and thorough review of the replies, we brought forward these proposed changes to the open air bylaw, which includes recreational fires. We made some minor modifications to the bylaw as outlined in this report, and suggest we change the time frame from 5 p.m. to midnight to 12 noon to midnight, and the setback requirements in the yards less than 15 meters of width to be reduced from 4 meters to 3 meters. I'm pleased to report that we had 1,305 residents respond to the survey request. That was a great engagement process, and I was pleased with the community that replied with over 80 pages of comments on top of that. In short, 1,250 agreed and 55 disagreed with open air burning in the township. Due to the extensive list of comments, we provided them as an attachment for council's review, as it would take me far too long to go through all of them. It should be noted that most comments became very common amongst the 4 questions and was very evident in the additional comment field as well. At this time, we're happy to answer any questions council may have, and look forward to the implementation of the proposed bylaw to be effective January 1st, 2022.
Okay, are there any comments or questions on this hot topic? Councillor Holm. Go ahead, Councillor Holm. Oh, I'm hearing, I don't know if you can hear it, but I'm hearing thunder.
Oh yeah, it's booming. It's booming at my office as well. And my apologies, Chief. I meant to connect with you earlier, and it's just been one of those days where I'm racing around. So can you clarify something for me? Because I think I might have misread something, which will address one of my questions. Are you saying that it's now noon, like 12 lunchtime to, okay, thank you. That was one of my, so that takes that off the list. Okay. And then the other thing, can you clarify for me page 59 and page 60, where you break down the funding that goes through the different calls for the 5 fires? I'm just confused on the cost recovery and how that works. I'm not sure if this is a you thing or a Director of Corporate Services thing, but can you just explain to me how that breakdown works of finances?
Sorry, I'm just getting to the page that you're speaking to. What specific year were you speaking to, or in general?
So with the funding that goes out to how many stations are responding to a call?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to process.
How is it arrived at, Councillor?
Yes, and then so I'm looking at also the cost that you have that with how much we're spending to do that. Just kind of looking for explanation as to, because I just didn't realize it cost that much to respond to that many calls. I'm just looking for some clarification. I have more questions following that, but just, yeah, if you can explain that to me.
So I think what you're asking me is our charge out rate in our fees and charges bylaw, which is approved by council, speaks to the MTO rate per apparatus. And then we also have a rate per firefighter. And that's where we base the cost on per hour that the fire department attends these type of calls. That's how it's all broken down. So we will use that in some cases when the call to the emergency becomes the result of a spread from a backyard fire or an unattended fire. Then we will then look at what punitive actions do we have to take based on existing legislation, the bylaw, all of those factors put into play. And when it extends to property damage to another property, that's when we have to sort of become the most punitive, because the landowner of the affected property has been impacted in a negative manner as well. So the goal of this bylaw in the end is to try and condense these down to less and less of these incidents occurring, so that we can make our community safer and put more restrictions on some of these things. A lot of the legacy permits that existed, a lot of the residents, after they've had a permit for whatever number of years, in some cases more than 20, they've long forgotten what the bylaw ever spoke to. And in spite of our best efforts of sending out public education materials, not everyone sees it. It doesn't reach the audience appropriately, whereas the annual permit process will reach that audience effectively. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
That's the first layer. So I do appreciate that. A follow-up, Mayor. So personally, I'm troubled by the $20 that we're charging. Like, so how I'm processing this is charging people that are mostly compliant. So let's just, like I'm saying, if someone gets a new fire pit in their backyard, I think that that's completely reasonable to get that fee, is how I'm processing it. But then to have to do an annual thing, if nothing has changed since that last year, that maybe there's a 5-year life or a 10-year life, I just think that that's more a reasonable thing than an annual. That just seems like a lot of work and a lot of fee associated. So I have concerns with this being an annual thing, as if it's already been approved once. And I do have some serious concerns about that. So I don't know if you can comment on that, about why we didn't review it being like a 5-year thing. I'm having really a lot of trouble supporting it being yearly.
So there's quite a number of moving parts to this process. The $20 fee is attached to all of the administrative costs downstream of this process, and that's where the $20 fee is. We don't want to, this is something that we don't want the general levy to have to fund. This is one of those, if I want to have a backyard fire, then it should be funded by the people who want to use that service versus the people that don't want to use that service. So that's why the fee is born. There is a cost to implement this system. So there's a canned website that we'll be using that already does all of the things we need, and we have to pay for that service. So the $20 fee helps cover some of the offsetting costs for that service. The other big thing that you need to consider with this too, Councillor Hallman, is it's the public education and the reach that we'll have with this particular platform. So annually, and I'm not speaking to every resident, but it's been my experience that if I were to speak to a resident 6 months after they get their permit, they commonly start to lose some of the rules and regulations of those permits. Whereas when you reinforce it annually, people tend to get better at it every year, and eventually they really understand the rules and regulations. So our false alarms start to go down, our nuisance calls start to go down, and there's less back-end cost to the fire service responding to those, so we can be responding to the calls that we're needed to be at. So that's one issue. The public safety messaging that we send out with this program, because they have to, it's kind of like tick boxes. They have to do the application, they have to provide a photograph of their site, make sure they meet the requirements of the permit, and they keep ticking the boxes down as they go, and they have to follow this process. Once they get to if they answer all the appropriate questions, then their permit is approved, and they're good for the 12-month period. They pay the fee during that process. That's kind of how it works. The other advantage to this is that it's a smartphone or a website enabled process. So for example, if we do a burn ban, all I have to do is basically hit a button, send a burn ban out, and it communicates to every single permit user, with the odd exception for those that aren't digitally connected. Everyone instantly, and including our firefighters, see that there's a burn ban out. We'll still follow up with a press release like we normally do, but it gets that message out there. If a permit holder's permit is revoked, they immediately get a message directly from this platform to say your permit has been revoked. And then we'll go through that process where we can educate, rehabilitate, and hopefully get them back into a permit situation. So there's a whole variety of moving parts to this whole process that involve costs, and this is a user fee system. It's been my experience personally that it's very successful. People like it. It's easy to use, and it's very informative at the end of the day.
A follow-up, Mayor? What does thank you, through the mayor to the chief. What does the program cost the municipality?
So it depends on the number of permits we sell per year. So it's a point system. So you have to buy so many points for each permit. So for example, let's say we buy 5,000 points, and every point, some things cost you 2 or 3 points, some cost 1 point, depending on the nature. It's all laid out in the program. Their fee structure is the most complex part of this. It's very confusing, and unfortunately, I can't explain it to you in great detail right now. I could get back to you with more information on that. But let's say, for example, I release a burn ban, and we had 2,000 permits out there. That would be 1 times 2,000 users. That's 2,000 points gone in the click of one button. And then to lift the burn ban, I have to do that again. So that's now 4,000 points as an example. So if I buy 5,000 points at the cost of $500, and honestly, I'm picking a number out of the sky right now, but if I were to pay for that, it's very quick in the period of a year. Those points get eaten up very quickly. You have to keep in mind too that every permit application costs points. Every notification that your permit's been successfully approved eats up some points. So 5,000 points becomes 25,000 points very quickly in a year. And we also I have to point out, we've never done this process before. We have no sense right now exactly of how many permits we would actually issue, because the legacy permits that are already out there have fallen off the trail of administration, that registry piece. Our records are not entirely accurate, and so there are cases where we don't know where permits exist. So we're just not sure. I think the point to this whole thing, and to wind this up, is that again, it's a user-based system. So if we need this many points, the $20 that permit holder paid helps cover that administrative cost at the end of the day. To the $20 point too, there are a number of municipalities charged for annual permits. They range in price from $20 is the most average or most common fee. They go $25, and I've seen them as high as $140 for an annual permit. So.
Okay, thank you. Another question through the mayor? I'm looking at, sorry, I'm just scrolling down here because I had another one. Okay, so page 64. I'm just wondering why there was no wind speed considerations to the recreational fires, because wind is wind, does it matter? So shouldn't it be applied to the recreational fires as well? Like
it applies.
If a residential. Oh,
sorry,
if you know what I mean.
Okay, yeah, no, it applies to all fires in the township.
Gotcha. Okay, so I misunderstood it. Okay, that's enough for me for now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Gerber.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong, to Chief Leeson. I know we communicated a few times during the day today, so I appreciate the updates. One of my concerns was the comments around time. So I appreciate the revision from noon to midnight. Certainly those people that are looking for, with younger children, or certainly that winter, the winter recreational fire that you don't really often consider, but, people with backyard rinks are, able to have, ponds or on the river where they're able to clear it off and skate. So that's a great change. I appreciate the change to the 3 meters from 4 meters for, if you're in a situation where you need to have a spark arrest lid, that's the manufacturer's spec, and that we're going with that. So I appreciate that. I did have a couple questions about the online application process and how that would work, but you were able to address those through your responses to Councillor Hallman. So thanks for doing that. And I can certainly see the educational piece. I know for years we didn't have dog tags, and we didn't charge for dog tags. And eventually, we got around to, I don't want to say catching up, but we sort of got around to the point where we recognized the need to do so. And at first it's sort of hey, I've always had a dog. I've never paid to have a dog. But then you just get used to sort of doing your permit every year. And I think in this case, to me, there's a lot more doomsday scenarios that could have been out there as far as a recreational fire bylaw. I know we're not satisfying everybody tonight, but I know we're probably bringing more people into legal conformity than we are disappointing. And I think that the regulations are such that, that I would hope anyway that most lots in the township would be able to find that 9-foot circle. Or 18-foot circle, I guess we need to go diameter, not radius, but to place a manufactured appliance with a spark lid in. So I'm excited. Thanks for the changes, and I think the ongoing piece of it, what you said as far as being able to educate people, I think it's a step towards saving this important institution in Wilmot, rather than letting it continue to be a bit of a frontier experience. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, to the chief. Yeah, I did a little bit of research myself on the weekend here too. Found a few communities that are charging, and I know, Chief, we had talked this afternoon about, you explained there's numerous communities charging, but what I did find, the communities that aren't charging, their bylaws were dated from 2004, 2005, and I think there's probably going to be a general shift as people update their bylaws to be a user pay like we're going to do here. The one thing I was going to say too is a tremendous amount of work went into this, like 1,300 survey results. That's got to be a record for the township, I guess. And the other thing too, if somebody has a fire and they don't have a permit, you noticed, or you commented on the Provincial Fences Act. Do you have any idea what that would be for somebody has a fire without a permit? And all, secondly, do you have any ballpark idea how many legacy permits are out there? Like even a ballpark?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, in answer to your legacy permit question, I honestly don't know that answer. We have some records, and I could give you a reasonable total of what's on file, but I can assure you that that does not include all of the outstanding permits that are out there. So it would be a bit of a false number. And I don't have that number in front of me right now. I could get it. In answer to your first question, burning without a permit is going to be $300 will be the set fine. So we typically don't put the set fines in front of council because council can't approve the set fines. They're approved by the Crown. And so that's why we don't bog everybody down with fees and whatnot. It has to be approved by the province anyway. So we just don't include those type of pieces into the report. Certainly it'll be a public document once it's approved.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gordick.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. I just have a question, two parts, or two questions actually, and you can answer them. how is this going to be rolled out? Like, will it be through like a tax notice that people know? Is it going to be, I probably read it, but my brain is just, there was a lot there. Is it going to start for the calendar year in January, I'm assuming? Yes. And so that's that. How do you roll out so people know about it? Because as you already previously mentioned, not everybody's digital. So for them to be able to do that, and will there be a manual application form for them to come in to do that if they're not a digital person? Especially when you mentioned the picture upload. So I'm wondering how we go about doing that for people that perhaps don't have access to taking pictures of their backyard. And second, would this also include like fire tables? Just asking for people out there who sort of sit around with their neighbors and their, would that also include getting something for those types of things? Does that include a fire table for having a fire pit?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. So let's see, the answer to the rollout, there'll be a press release done. Hence the reason why we asked for the beginning of the calendar year, because then all the operational requirements, the appropriate advertising mechanisms will be put in place between now and January 1 to make sure that people are aware. And then during the spring and the launch of the whole program, we'll be doing extensive follow-up advertising to make sure people are aware of that process. As for the manual piece, yes, there is a manual process in place for those people that, you know, there are a few, not many, but we'll accommodate their needs. We'll go out to their site and help them and make sure we look after them. There'll be a manual form we can do. In fact, the process, our admin assistant would be able to go online with them right there at the office if they came to the counter, and we could do it for them. There's paper, there's ways we'll help them. We've already put lots of thought into those pieces or those moving parts. As for the tables or the gas fired appliances, anything that's propane or natural gas fired falls under TSSA regulations and is exempt from the burn bylaw in the township. They follow manufacturers' clearance to combustibles. If they're allowed to be put onto, some are allowed to be put on a combustible surface, some are not. So it depends. If we get a complaint, first thing we do, and we do get them the odd time on those appliances, first thing we do is we research the manufacturer's installation requirements. Once we determine what those are, if they're meeting the requirements, then our business is done. If they're not, we educate them and have them move the appliance to a safe location and then move on from there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fenning.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. I actually have questions now that I didn't have before. So this has been a good discussion. I'm going to start with saying, you know, I don't have a problem with the $20 or the annual renewal, because I do see value in the education and reinforcement of reminders of appropriate things with fires, and wholeheartedly agree with working to curb burning of inappropriate materials. My questions came up when you were talking about the website. Is council going to see some more information about that before it's rolled out? Has that decision been made that that's what this website provider, are we going to get any more information about that, or when will we see information about that? I just, I have a lot of questions about it. So, and maybe now isn't the time to ask them. Perhaps when we're going to be seeing that information would be a better time.
Thanks, Councillor. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. I think the most appropriate answer I can give you right now, Councillor Fenning, is that to show you the website now, I can't, because it's not set up yet. I need permission from council to proceed with this bylaw. Once we get it set up, I'm happy to sell you the first permit when you want to get your, we can use you as a test. And quite honestly, all joking aside, we could have each councillor apply for a permit, and then we could just remove it from the system if you don't actually need a permit. And you would then see the actual site and how it operates and in its live state. We don't have a test platform that we can play with. So it's, if that's appropriate, I'll be happy to let council know once the process is in place and give you the, it'll be a website. It'll be embedded in our Wilmot Township website, but it'll actually say Wilmot burn permits. The company that does this has hundreds of fire departments that use it. So this is what they do.
A follow-up, if I may?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So I guess what I was more asking was about the selection process for that particular web provider. And you had mentioned that their fee structure was pretty complex, and I'm interested in all of that information in terms of, you know, how we're rolling this out and understanding what it's going to cost us, and yeah, all that background detail.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, to be more specific to that piece of the question, there are 2 providers in the province of Ontario available. We went with what we find to be the more commonly used. The other provider, if you do high volume permits, they might be a better choice for cost, but I don't think we'll reach their threshold. So the point system is better because it's based on the users instead. So if a certain amount of that $20 goes towards paying for the website and the application of how many times that user on average will use points off that website. And then there's costs for us to administrate at the back end. And that's where we arrived at the $20 fee. So the other, I think it's important that council understands too, the other piece of that fee. And again, I have nothing to back this up because we have no history yet of this type of program, but it'll also go towards dealing with complaints because we have a fire prevention officer that has to go out and take the time to do these things. So it's important to understand that there's anything to do that's attached to the burn bylaw, this $20 fee will help offset some of those costs so that the taxpayers, the general levy, isn't paying for all of these things.
Sorry, just another follow-up to that. Could council be circulated on the name of the provider and the other provider as well, just for our information, and maybe that fee structure and sort of kind of sounds like my recent search for a new punch clock software. I didn't start out with a lot of questions, and now I've got a lot of questions, and I'm feeling a little bit like I don't have enough information, because I am seeing that there's and I fully believe that you've done your homework, but I'm not seeing what will make me comfortable in feeling like I know what I'm voting on here. You know, the $20 a year, to me, I think that's a really reasonable rate. But if we're not sure what it's going to cost us, and we're not sure if that fee might have to change eventually or sooner, quite soon, then perhaps, what would that look like? I'm not totally feeling comfortable with that aspect of it.
Well, sorry, Councillor Fenning. Let me be clear. This is an operational matter that the fire department has to administrate, and so we've made the decision to use this platform. Otherwise, we'd have to hire a webmaster to design the program, and that would cost an astronomical amount of money when we can go to a canned program that's already used successfully by many departments across the province. Again, I'm going back to the $20 is the average fee that a lot of the departments charge. There are a few that charge a little less, but they have a very small population with very few permits. I think what's important for you to understand about the fee structure is the fee structure is based on the user. So the average user will use a certain number of points per year based on the average number of access points that they make. And every time the user makes a, like they might make a request to the fire prevention officer to answer a question on the platform, which they can do. That costs a point, or it may cost 2 points and maybe 4 points because it's two-way communication. Or the fire prevention officer may choose to go to the site instead. So there's unknowns with how the users in the Township of Wilmot will use the system, which I can't answer that question until we have, ask me January 2023, I can give you some statistics, I can give you some numbers, I can give you some facts, I can tell you what the average person's using for points. All of those factors then fall into play, and I can give you actual figures. Right now, I can only go on my previous experience, and I can only go on discussions with other fire departments on what they've experienced at this time. So I hope that makes you feel a little more comfortable. It's not I know it appears to be a dartboard toss, but it really isn't. There is a number of moving parts and behind the scenes that have been discussed with other departments to find out what their experiences have been, and speaking to the vendor as well about, what do you feel we would normally use per person, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm happy to share both the vendors. There's pricing on their websites too. They'll talk about how many points it is for somebody, $500 or $1,000 or whatever the cost may be, depending on how many points you buy. Just keep in mind when you're looking at these sites that every point is used. Every time you access the system, a point or two may be used for certain things. It just depends on the usage of the customer. Okay.
Thanks, Chief. Councillor Gerber.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Yeah, my sort of perspective on it is we're voting on the bylaw, and yes, there's a cost piece, and yes, the cost is tied to some of the implementation pieces of it. But as the chief commented, the implementation piece is a bit more operational. I know when we're setting the fees for the pool, we don't know exactly the percentage of that goes to rec web, or when we're setting the fees for different things where people are interfacing with the township through software, we know there's some of the money is going to help offset the cost of the software. And I'm pretty confident in the research that the chief has done. I don't know if Director Kelly's in a position to comment on that, or he may not have been involved in it at all, in which case that's fine too. But again, I think the main thing is that we're voting on that, the parameters around which, the permits will be issued, understanding there's an online portal. There's going to be some costs associated with that. I mean, we could find in a year, we've overshot, and maybe we can charge $15, or maybe we find we've undershot and we have to charge 25. But I think until we sort of get the process started, it sounds like a system that's been in place in other places. And like I said, I think the main parameters are the bylaw rather than the operational piece that support it.
Thank you. Councillor Hallman.
Thank you, through the mayor. So I'm kind of piggybacking on Councillor Gerber's comment there as well. Even though I get the operational aspect of this, I kind of have a multi-layered question. So I guess, Chief, if you can comment on what do you think we're spending, right? I don't know if we can have a dollar park on what we're spending on maintaining these fire pits right now. And then second is, coming out of COVID, well, $15 for a dog tag or $25 for a dog tag seems like nothing to some. Fires was one of the things in people's backyards they could do during the pandemic that created so much mental health support. And if we end up in another lockdown, that takes people out of their homes again for social gathering, and the fire is another one. And just like, I've just got this batting around in my head about what this looks like. So then, is it also possible, as Councillor Gerber kind of just mentioned, to execute this without the fee and then have you come back in a year's time and say, this is what the users are doing, and to create an appropriate fee structure around the use. I kind of think that I might be interested in asking my peers around the horseshoe what they feel about that one.
Well, if I'm going to make any comment to that, Councillor Hallman, through you, Mayor Armstrong, the risk to that is that it's going to cost the general levy it's going to cost the general levy money to bring the program online, and basically we're asking all the taxpayers to pay for a user system, and I honestly don't think it's fair. I think it's important that this council understands that I came from a municipality that already had a system in place to collect fees for burn permits. There was no pushback whatsoever from that township, albeit a smaller township. But it's been my personal experience as a fire chief in a previous location that a $20 fee to have a recreational fire was absolutely no burden on anyone. People enjoy the luxury of doing it. They realize that the cost of that $20 is to, cover the operational costs. It covers some of the costs of fire department staff having to go look after certain things and aspects of the implementation of the bylaw. And to Councillor Gerber's point, this is more about the bylaw than it is the operational piece. We're putting the operational piece in to make it easier for our residents to access the process and the systems. The public safety messaging that we need to send out to keep the system safe, it outweighs the $20 tenfold. It's just, I can't stress enough how much the public information or the public education piece to the application process, how important that is to reinforce that, and how important it is to reinforce the requirements of the bylaw so people clearly understand when they tick the box and pay their fee and they get their permit, they clearly understand what their requirements are, because on the downside to that, there's the enforcement piece, and we have to have the ability to enforce it for those people who choose not to follow the rules. We have a measurement at the beginning, whenever they applied for the permit, I can easily go back to that person and say, you clearly agreed to these rules. Now we're going to enforce this because we have to, because you've left us no choice. So it's just, I realize it's a little bit, it's difficult, and I knew the financial piece would probably come up amongst council, and I respect where you're coming from, but I think you have to trust my expertise, and you have to trust the fact that I've had some experience with this, and it's very successful. I can't give you statistics because I don't have those in front of me from the township I came, and it doesn't apply to this township anyway. Wilmot is very different than where I came from. So.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Through the mayor, I'd be in favor of going with the $20. I don't think it's fair to have people that don't even have a fire pit pay for somebody that does have a fire pit. So to me, that's the way to go.
Thank you. Councillor Fanning.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. I don't have any issue with as I said from the outset, I'm not concerned about the $20. I think, it's less than $2 a month. So, it's a very minimal fee. I would really like to see the information. As you said, you could circulate that to us, so that would be great. And I will certainly be happy to sign up to be one of the first permit applications. And I very much support the education piece of this, and that reminder education. In most workplaces, it's a requirement that we retrain or have refresher for health and safety courses annually. And I think fires are certainly no different than that. So I fully support that, and I fully support the provisions within this bylaw. Just looking to understand the operational piece of the website and the costing and how that is going to work.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Chief, if I'm not mistaken, some of the literature, it can tell people how they can create a smokeless fire. Anyway, is there no further comments or questions? I'll read the recommendation that council approves the bylaw to regulate the setting of open air fires, including establishing the times during which open air fires may be set, to repeal bylaw number 2004-42, being a bylaw to regulate the setting of fires and precautions to be observed. And that is moved by Councillor Fenning, Councillor Fisher. All in favor? That is carried. Next item is the fire route bylaw update. You're up again, Chief.
Councillor Gordick had a question. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Gordick, go ahead.
Sorry, through you, Mayor Armstrong. I didn't see a notice, and maybe perhaps I'm misreading, but I've gotten an email from Miss Murray that we were having a delegation. Was that person, did they decide not to, or did we miss them? And I just want to.
They decided to cancel the delegation had a chat with the chief.
Thank you. I just wanted to make
and-
sure, but I know with everything going on, so my apologies. Didn't want to disrupt.
The delegation apparently was under the impression that we were looking at banning fires,
Thank you very much.
and she was much relieved. So, okay, so we have mover and seconder, and that was carried. So now we're on with the fire route. Go ahead, Chief.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. The fire road bylaws an outdated and required to review in much needed review and modernize. The most notable provision in this is to include a registry to keep track of all fire routes found within the township, and a mechanism for fire prevention to review properties on a rotational basis, and of course to support our bylaw department with enforcement. It's a pretty straightforward bylaw. It's had a legal review, and at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions that any of council may have.
Oh, there's a question en route. Councillor Gordick.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong, to the chief. Can you just clarify for those residents within our community that are in the adult lifestyle communities, would that include their streets? So for example, Morningside, Foxborough, and Stonecroft, will they have to be a little more cautious when they have some of their neighbors over with regards to parking on streets in front of people's homes? Just wanted, does that include, because for me, I think in Stonecroft, for example, I believe we're labeled as a laneway. So I don't know if that falls under the category or if we have a different type of name, and just sort of wanting to put that out there for some of the residents.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, the short answer to that question is that we typically don't target streets, even if, you know, if it's a laneway of, if you call it a true laneway, and I would more imply a laneway would be more of a remote property, say around Sunfish Lake, for example. Those are laneways and they're shared, so those become fire route issues in a lot of cases. So that's a place where we would apply the bylaw to that, especially if there's a safety issue. Fire trucks are large; they're 96 inches wide, and in some cases wider. They can be very tall especially if they're an aerial device. These apparatus, typically your fire route has to be 6 meters wide and 6 meters high. That's what they want to see. Well, that's not always practical either. So we like to apply some common sense to the bylaw when we're going into those locations. So a place like Morningside would not apply. The streets are a little wider. We're not going to drive down with those streets and not be able to pass a vehicle. Those type of applications would not apply in that case. Now, if there were a safety hazard identified by that community, then we would sit down and review it with that community and discuss those type of options. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yes, thank you, Chief. It's just I know that sometimes because of how we're defined in those adult living communities, I wanted also just for the residents to kind of understand and just to be aware as well, so that the definition for them is a little bit clearer as well. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Hallman.
Thank you. Through the mayor to the chief. I have one question myself, which is, does that include Cottage Lane in New Dundee? That would be. Yes.
Yes, it could include
Okay.
Cottage Lane.
Okay.
The old bylaw needed to be modernized to be more in line with the fire code as we apply it today. And there are some shared public access routes around some of our properties that need to be reviewed. So I don't want to specifically pick on that particular location, but we will now, assuming the council approves the bylaw, we'll have a mechanism in place then to look at these places when we have time to do so, for one, and two, we want to make sure that we have clear access to all of these places, because some of them are remote. When you get back into these offshoots off of main roads, they can be difficult to access, especially during the winter months.
And another question through the mayor. Thank you. I received a resident question about, will this improve traffic on corners of Stiefelmeyer in Baden and Captain McCallum in New Hamburg, or does this bylaw not impact that?
If we have identified a few corners such as those locations where there should be some setbacks from the corners, that it's very difficult to get fire apparatus. I don't even know how moving trucks get down, like, forget about fire apparatus. Some of the larger trucks that are moving a resident, maybe with their U-Haul or whatever, they would have I don't even know if they can get down some of those corners. They're too tight, and there's cars parked right up to the edge of those corners. So yes, we would be reviewing that, but that's an entirely different process. It's not under the fire road bylaw. It would go through Public Works. That's an entirely different discussion.
Okay, thank you. I will clarify that with them if they're not listening right now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, no further questions. The recommendation that council approves bylaw 2021-41 to designate private roadways as emergency fire routes along which no parking of vehicles shall be permitted, and to repeal bylaw number 85-5 being a bylaw to designate private roadways as emergency fire routes and requirements to be observed. Moved by Councillor Gordick, Councillor Hallman. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next item is correspondence. And the recommendation that correspondence item number 13.1 be received for information. And that is moved by Councillor Gordick, Councillor Hallman. No comments or questions. All in favor? That is carried. Next recommendation is that bylaws numbers 2021-41 and 2021-42 be introduced, ready first, second, and third time, and finally passed in open council. And that is moved by Councillor Gordick, seconded by Councillor Fisher. All in favor? That is carried. Any notice of motions? Seeing none. Any announcements? Councillor Gordick.
Hey, Mayor Armstrong. You can probably guess where mine are all coming because it's the week before. So first of all, I want to start off with this past Friday, we had a concert for Terry. Took place in New Dundee Bandshell, featuring a wonderful performance by Avery Raquel. This fundraiser for the Wilmot Terry Fox Run collected about $900 in donations for cancer research. The event was organized in just 2 days by my council colleague, Angie Hallman, and given the short notice, we expected an audience of about 30 people. Current public health regulations allow for gatherings up to 100 and outdoor events, and we hit that limit. The first applause of the evening came during the introduction when Councillor Hallman talked about how good it was to see so many smiling faces at a community event. This wasn't just a fundraiser, but also a welcome opportunity for Wilmot residents to get together as a community and celebrate safely. Thank you, Councillor Hallman, for all your hard work and for lifting our community spirits. Secondly, Moorish, an ice cream and milkshake trailer that's currently located in Sobeys parking lot, is hosting a fundraiser throughout this week for Terry Fox. When you place an order, if you share how Terry or another person with cancer has inspired you, proceeds from your order will be donated to the Wilmot Terry Fox Fund. So, and I'm going to just sort of share one of the things that to sort of go along with that Moorish is part of the reason that I'm inspired is from meeting the family, both Daryl and Fred Fox, and their commitment to carrying on their brother's legacy has kind of, it's really hit home with a lot of people in my family that we've had with cancer, and knowing that they're still committed and that there's no greater feeling to know that you just a penny is all that you need to do. It's just every little bit helps. And I just want to say anybody that can show up at Moorish and just give a little bit of inspiration to us to let us know that the work that the Fox family and the Terry Fox Run, what they mean to them, we really appreciate that. So thank you. And this coming Sunday is the big day. It's the virtual Wilmot Terry Fox Run on Sunday, September the 19th. And it's also officially recognized as Terry Fox Day in Ontario. We'd like you to register at wilmotterryfox.ca, collect pledges, and then walk, run, wheel, or bike wherever you are. Our virtual opening ceremony will be broadcast live on Facebook with special guests, inspirational stories, and some great music, and that starts at 9 o'clock. And finally, we'd like to thank the Township of Wilmot for its continued and valued support over the years. The community grant that we received for this year's campaign has enabled us to pay for social media advertising and other online services at a time when many of our activities are virtual. Thank you for your essential contribution to this year's fundraising. So thank you to everyone. And thanks to our residents for helping to support us throughout this year.
And we want to say thank you to you and your husband for all the hard work you do for the fundraising. You do a great job every year. Thank you. Councillor Hallman.
Thank you, through the mayor. I was going to share some of that news that you already shared about the fun time, the community that behaved themselves so well by being socially distanced and taking in, everybody wore their masks. It was great. And it was so nice to see everyone out. So thanks to everyone who attended that on Friday night. It's almost time to vote, everybody. I know it's not, it's a big federal election, so make sure you get out. And my sincere thanks to the Wilmot Township staff at the rec complex and all the volunteers who are working for the federal election. It's not possible without the people who sign up to do that, and it was not possible without the school board not allowing voting within their institutions. So thankful for staff in Wilmot Township for doing that and making it such a clear and easy process for the early polls. And don't forget to get out and vote.
Thank you. And that is a big ditto, I think, from every one of us for people to get out and vote. They need to do that. It's the only way they know we're thinking of them up there on the hill. Councillor Gordick.
Sorry, through you, Mayor Armstrong, just to follow up on Councillor Hallman. Just a reminder for those that perhaps would be interested. There's a debate. New Hamburg Board of Trade is having their debate this Wednesday night, a virtual debate. It starts at 7 o'clock, and they are asking for questions from the candidates. So if you're interested in having some opinions or having some answers to your questions, this Wednesday, September the 15th, and I'm not sure how, but if you go onto the Facebook group of the Hamburg Board of Trade, you'll probably find the links. I just wanted to remind everybody that it's coming up.
Very good. Thank you. It's the idea, get to know the people who want to represent you. You're hiring them, get to know them. Okay. And next is the confirmatory bylaw. And the recommendation that bylaw number 2021-42 to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held on September 13th, 2021, be introduced and read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed in open council. And that is moved by Councillor Gordick, Councillor Fenning. All in favor? That is carried. And the final recommendation that we do now adjourn to meet again at the call of the mayor. And that is moved by Councillor Gordick, seconded by Councillor Fisher. All in favor? That's it. We're done. That's carried. Everybody have a safe drive home.